Hey there, before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story. I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, take a deep breath, relax, and let your mind drift. These horror stories will crawl under your skin and linger in the dark. Let's begin. The first time I ever swam out at that lake at night, I knew something about it wasn't right. Not the usual kind of creepy, either. I've been in woods so dark you can't see your own hand and walked roads where dogs barked from yards that looked abandoned. This was different. It was too quiet, even with all that water moving. My cousin dared me to swim out past the rope where the drop-off is. He said I wouldn't make it because people sink there all the time. I went anyway. The water felt colder than it had earlier in the day, and by the time I was out past the rope, it was like something was pulling the heat right out of my chest. I kept kicking, steady strokes, but then I noticed I wasn't moving forward anymore. It was like the water itself was holding me in place. I glanced back, trying to see the lights from shore, but they looked farther away than they should have. That was when I felt the tug. Not a big yank, not yet, just the faintest pull on my ankle, like fishing line brushing against my skin. I kicked harder, and it stopped. For a second, I convinced myself it was just weeds. But weeds don't grow that deep out there. I tried to keep my rhythm, not panic, but then I felt it again, stronger this time. A hand, I swear to God, it felt like a hand closing over my leg. I went under, just for a second, but long enough for my lungs to burn. When I broke back up, I shouted toward the shore, but my cousin's voice sounded thin, far away, like he couldn't hear me. I treaded water, kicking wildly, and the grip loosened, but the fear didn't. The worst part wasn't the pull. It was what I saw just before I got my head above the surface again. It was pale, round, floating under me. For a split second, I thought it was a face, eyes open, staring up. But then the water shifted, and it was gone. And I couldn't be sure anymore if it was real or just the lights on shore playing tricks through the waves. I swam harder than I ever have in my life. The whole way back, the water felt thicker, like something pushing against me. My cousin kept yelling, telling me to hurry up, his voice finally sounding clearer the closer I got. By the time I reached the rope, my arms felt like lead. I grabbed it, gasping, too scared to look back, but I swear the rope shuddered in my hands, like something brushed against it, right where I was holding on. I didn't go out there again that night. I sat shivering on the dock while my cousin laughed, saying I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't argue. I just stared out at the black water, waiting for something else to break the surface. And that was when I saw it. Something floating farther out, drifting in and out of the moonlight. It was too big to be a branch, too still to be a bird. I leaned forward, trying to make sense of it, and that was the exact second it moved. It rolled just enough that I caught the glint of water running off skin. I froze, leaning so far forward on the dock that the boards creaked under me. My cousin kept talking, something about how I was a chicken, but I didn't hear a word of it. I couldn't take my eyes off that shape drifting out in the dark. At first, it looked like it was just lying there, floating on its back. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel natural, like every bit of life has already left it. I wanted to believe it was nothing more than a trick of the light. Maybe just a log caught up in the current, but I've seen plenty of driftwood before. This wasn't shaped like that. This was shaped like a person. I whispered to my cousin to look, but when he squinted out there, he just shook his head. I don't see anything. I could hear the edge in his voice, like he thought I was just trying to spook him. That made me angrier than anything. I wasn't trying to scare him. I wanted him to see what I was seeing, because I knew if I blinked for even a second, it would vanish. Then it did move, not drifting with the current, not rocking with the waves. It turned. The shoulders shifted first, then the head. The water parted just enough that I knew it wasn't some branch rolling over. That's when I stood up so fast the dock rattled. My cousin laughed nervously, asking what the hell was wrong with me, but he still wouldn't look. I could barely find the words. My throat was so dry. "There's somebody out there," I said. I expected him to jump up, maybe call for help, but he just rolled his eyes, muttering that I'd been spooked ever since I went past the rope. I thought about it for a long minute. Maybe I had gotten myself worked up. Maybe I was seeing faces where there weren't any. But I couldn't shake how real it felt when I was under the water. That cold grip on my ankle didn't feel like imagination. We ended up walking back to the cabin, but I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. My cousin teased me, asking if I wanted him to tuck me in, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let my guard down, not that night. I sat by the window while he went to sleep, watching the water ripple under the moonlight. For a while, it was just calm, and I almost let myself believe it was all in my head. Then, a sound carried across the water. It was faint, but clear enough in the quiet night. A splash, not like a fish, heavier, like someone kicking, than another. I leaned closer to the glass, heart thudding against my ribs, and I swear I saw it again. Something pale breaking the surface, just long enough to glimmer before sinking back down. I shook my cousin awake, told him to listen, but by the time he stumbled to the window, the water was still again. He cursed at me, told me to quit it, and let him sleep. I almost did, but the unease kept crawling under my skin. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it again, only closer. Not a splash this time, more like a dragging sound, like wet fabric being pulled across wood. I sat up straight, staring at the dock. The boards were damp, darker than the rest, though I knew it hadn't rained. I got as close to the window as I could, squinting at the dock, and my stomach flipped. Something was standing at the very end of it, tall, thin, and motionless, like it was waiting. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again, nothing there. But when I finally backed away from the window, I realized my feet were wet. The rug under the bed was soaked through, and I could see a faint trail of water leading from the door toward me. Story 2. In the summer of 2012, a small boat drifted slowly across the surface of the lake. Its motor cut, its 2 passengers casting lines into the water. The men weren't out there to make history, just to catch bass, maybe drink a few beers before heading home. Neither of them expected to pull up anything heavier than a fish. The first sign that something was wrong came when the line caught hard. The younger man tugged at it, thinking it had snagged on the bottom, but the boat was too far from shore for that. He gave it another pull, and the rod bent nearly double. "Feels like I hooked a log," he muttered. The other man laughed, telling him to quit yanking before the line snapped. But when it finally loosened, it didn't feel like wood. The line came back slow, heavy, dragging something up from the dark water below. It wasn't until the younger man leaned over the side, squinting through the ripples, that he saw the pale outline rising toward him. At first, He thought it was a mannequin. The lake had a reputation for strange debris surfacing now and then, but the moment it broke through the water, all doubt vanished. It was a body, bloated, waterlogged, and tangled in fishing line. The men froze. For a long second, neither of them moved, both staring at the figure bobbing alongside the boat. The face was swollen beyond recognition, the skin pale and waxy, the clothes clinging like they'd been there for weeks. The younger man gagged, fumbling to cut the line, but the other grabbed his arm. "Don't let it sink again. We need to call this in." They pulled the body close enough to tie it off against the boat, then fumbled for a phone. Their voices shook as they tried to explain to the dispatcher what they'd found. It took nearly 40 minutes for authorities to reach them, and every one of those minutes felt stretched thin. The body drifted beside them in silence, bumping softly against the hull, eyes half-lidded, mouth open just enough to look like it was about to speak. When the deputies arrived, they pulled the body aboard and covered it with a tarp. The men on the fishing boat sat in shock, unable to look away. One of the deputies asked if they knew the name attached to the missing person report that matched the description. They shook their heads. They didn't want to know. Later, it came out that the body belonged to a man who had vanished weeks earlier after falling overboard during a night outing with friends. Rescue crews had searched for him for days before calling it off, the lake too deep and murky to give up its dead easily. Locals said it happened often, that the lake held on to people, releasing them only when it wanted to. For the two fishermen, the image stayed burned into their memory. The way the skin looked under the moonlight, the silence that fell between them, and the sickening weight of having pulled up more than they ever intended to. One of them swore off fishing at night altogether. The other never spoke about it again, but both of them admitted the same thing years later when asked. The worst part wasn't the body itself. It was the feeling that it hadn't come up by accident, that something below had let go. The body was taken from the lake that night, zipped into a bag, and lifted onto the back of the coroner's van. The two fishermen gave their statements, voices flat, repeating the same details again and again: where they had been, what time they had set out, how the body had risen to the surface. Neither of them slept afterward. The younger one went home and sat on his porch until dawn, staring at his hands like the weight of that body was still in them. He told his wife that it hadn't felt like just finding a person. It had felt like being handed something, as though the lake itself had chosen him, out of all the boats drifting that night, to be the one to pull it up. The older man went back the next day to see the area in daylight. He motored out to the same spot, dropped anchor, and just sat there. The water was calm, nothing unusual. But when he reeled in his first line, it came back slick with weeds, thick and black, clinging like ropes. He cut them away with a knife, hands shaking, and left without casting again. From then on, he never stayed out past dusk. The sheriff's office closed the case officially. Accidental drowning, body recovered. But the details clung to the locals. They said the man's body had been trapped in underwater trees, tangled where the old forests still stood beneath the surface. The branches held him down for weeks before finally letting him go. It was the kind of explanation that sounded reasonable on paper, yet didn't match the way it had unfolded. The fishermen swore that when the body surfaced, it hadn't risen slowly like something caught on a hook. It had shot upward, buoyant and deliberate, until it was right beside the boat. And when they tried to cut the line, it hadn't drifted back under, it had stayed, as though waiting to be acknowledged. One of the deputies who responded that night later admitted he didn't like being on the water anymore. Not because of what he'd seen, but because of what he'd felt. He said that as he leaned over to grab the body, the water was warm at the surface, but colder just beneath, like standing on the edge of a drop. That sharp line between two temperatures made his skin crawl, as though something else was down there in the cold watching him. The case faded from the news in a matter of days, just another drowning in a long line of them. But for those who had been there, it never left their minds. Both fishermen eventually sold their boats, claiming they were too old for the water. Privately, though, each of them admitted the same thing. They didn't trust the lake anymore. It wasn't the body that haunted them. It was the silence that followed after it was pulled out. The air had felt too still, the water too calm, as if the lake was resetting itself, satisfied, waiting for the next time. Story 3. I never really believed the stories about the woman in the water. People talk a lot when it comes to that lake. Some say she's real. Some say she's nothing more than a way to explain the bad feeling people get out there at night. I didn't buy into any of it, at least not until the night I drove back from work. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was just tired of being in the car. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there with the window down. The water looked black, flat, and quiet, though I could hear it lapping against the rocks below. No wind, no boats, just that slow sound of water moving. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, until I saw her. At first, I thought it was just someone swimming. She was out past where the shallow water ended, drifting in a slow circle, her head barely breaking the surface, long hair floating out around her like weeds. I got out of the car and walked closer, trying to make sense of it. There weren't any lights on the water, no boat nearby, nothing, just her moving without much effort. I called out, asking if she was all right, but she didn't answer. She didn't even turn. Something about that silence made my chest tighten. People don't ignore you like that if they're in the middle of a dark lake, they answer, even if it's just to wave you off. I called again, louder this time, and that's when she finally shifted. Her head turned just enough that I could see the side of her face, pale, almost gray in the moonlight. Her hair clung wet to her cheek. I froze. My first thought was that she needed help, that maybe she was in shock, but before I could move, she slipped under. No splash, no flailing, no sign of a struggle. She just sank, vanishing so smoothly it didn't look real. I ran down to the edge of the rocks, scanning the water, waiting for her to come back up. A minute passed, then another. Nothing. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I took out my phone to call for help, but when I glanced back at the water, I nearly dropped it. She was there again, closer this time, maybe 10 feet from shore, standing waist deep with her hair covering her face. I don't remember moving, but I found myself stepping back, my shoes slipping on the rocks. I tried to say something, but my voice came out thin and broken. She just stood there, the water rippling around her legs like she'd been there the whole time. Then she tilted her head, not like a person acknowledging someone else, but like a question, slow, sharp, unnatural. That single motion sent me scrambling back up the path toward my car. By the time I got to the top, I forced myself to turn and look again. The water was empty. I stood there shaking, trying to catch my breath, convincing myself I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just overtired, seeing shapes in the water. Maybe it was nothing. But as I fumbled for my keys, I heard it. A woman's voice, carrying low across the lake. Not words, just a sound. A cry that didn't echo, didn't fade. It felt like it was meant for me alone. That sound didn't belong out there. It wasn't the kind of noise you mistake for an animal or the wind. It was distinctly human, low and drawn out, cutting across the water like it came from right below me. I froze with the keys in my hand, too afraid to move, too afraid not to. I finally forced myself into the car, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat there, gripping the wheel, telling myself over and over that I'd imagined it. But then the sound came again, clearer this time. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a laugh. It was somewhere in between, like someone was trying to cry out, but the water kept filling their lungs. I turned the engine on, headlights flashing across the trees, but something in me wouldn't let me drive. I sat there staring through the windshield, my eyes drawn back toward the shoreline. She was standing there, not in the water anymore, but on the edge where the rocks met the sand. Her figure just barely caught in the beam of my headlights, soaked from head to toe, hair hanging straight down, dress clinging against her legs. The distance wasn't far, but far enough that I couldn't make out her face. Only the pale shape of it turned slightly toward me. Every instinct I had screamed to put the car in gear and get out, but I couldn't. I felt nailed to the seat, like if I moved too quickly, she'd come closer. My hand hovered over the gear shift, shaking. She stepped forward, just once. The sound of wet feet on stone carried even through the closed windows. I jammed the car into reverse, so hard it jerked, nearly stalling. The headlights swung away, cutting her from view. I didn't wait for another look. I floored it back down the road until the trees swallowed everything. By the time I made it home, my hands were so stiff I had to peel them off the wheel. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the living room with all the lights on, replaying it over and over in my head. I told myself it could have been a person, just some woman swimming late at night. But no one moves like that. No one vanishes and reappears without a sound. And no one follows you from the water to the shore without leaving so much as a splash. For days, I didn't go near the lake. Then, out of some twisted need to prove to myself that I hadn't lost my mind, I drove back in daylight. Everything looked normal. Families were swimming, kids splashing, boats moving across the surface like nothing was wrong. I walked to the same overlook, staring at the spot where I'd seen her. The water glittered harmlessly in the sun, but when I looked down at the rocks where she'd stood, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The stones were darker, in a wide circle, like they'd been soaked, and right in the middle of that circle, a trail of faint prints led up toward the path. Bare feet, small. I didn't stay to follow them, and I haven't been back at night since. Story 4. People like to say the accidents on that lake are just bad luck, or too much drinking, or someone not paying attention. And yeah, most of the time that's probably true. But the night I lost a friend out there, it didn't feel like luck or carelessness. It felt like the water itself wanted him. We'd gone out on a small boat late in the evening, just the three of us. The sun had dropped and left that pale kind of light where everything looks washed out. The water was calm and the air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. We weren't doing anything wild, just talking, having a couple beers, laughing at dumb stories. He leaned back on the edge of the boat, like he always did, relaxed and careless. Then, without warning, he slipped. It didn't happen fast. He didn't dive or fall straight down. He slid, like something pulled him off balance, and he went over with a dull splash. We all laughed at first, expecting him to come back up and curse at us for not helping. But the seconds stretched, and nothing broke the surface. I remember leaning over the edge, my hands gripping so tight the wood bit into my palms, waiting for him to pop up. He was a strong swimmer. He wasn't the type to panic in the water, but the lake stayed still, just ripples fading where he'd gone under. I jumped in after him. The water was colder than it had any right to be that time of year, stealing my breath the second I hit. I dove down once, twice, my eyes burning, reaching through the dark, but there was nothing, not a trace. By the time I came back up, the other guy was shouting, throwing me a rope, begging me to get back on the boat before I wore myself out. I didn't want to. I felt sick, knowing he was down there somewhere, maybe just out of reach. But the more I fought the water, the heavier it seemed to get, like every kick dragged me deeper instead of pushing me up. We called it in, but the search didn't last long that night. Too dark, too dangerous, they said. They promised to be back at first light with divers. I barely slept, sitting on the shore and staring at the water, convinced he was going to climb back out at any moment. But dawn came, and he didn't. It took days before they found him. The current hadn't carried him far. He was tangled in the old trees under the surface, the ones left behind when they flooded the land. The officials explained it away easily enough, said he must have gotten caught, said it happens more often than people realize. But none of that sat right with me. I keep replaying the way it happened, the way he slipped, the way the water seemed to swallow him without a fight. And the worst part was this: before he went under, right as he lost his footing, I swear I heard him say something. He whispered, almost too quiet to catch. "She's right there. She's right there." The words have stuck with me ever since. I didn't even process them in the moment. It was only afterward, when I replayed everything in my head, that I realized he said it at all. I remember looking around when he whispered it, trying to figure out who he was talking about. There was no one, just me, our other buddy, and the water stretching out empty in every direction. When the divers brought his body up days later, they told us he'd been found only 20 feet from where he went under. 20 feet, but it might as well have been a mile. They said his leg was twisted in the branches of a dead oak down there, the kind of tree you wouldn't believe was still standing unless you saw it. They gave us the usual line that he drowned because he couldn't untangle himself, because panic set in. But I'd been right there. I'd watched him slip. He never fought. He never splashed. It was as if he just let go. We're at the funeral. People tried to comfort me by saying accidents happen. I nodded, but it didn't feel like an accident. It felt like the lake had reached up and chosen him. Every time I close my eyes, I see the way the water closed over his head without so much as a ripple. Too smooth, too quiet. I stopped going out on the lake after that, but I couldn't keep away from the shore. Some part of me needed answers. I'd drive out there late at night and just sit in my truck, watching the black surface shift under the moon. More than once, I thought I saw something. A figure drifting where he went under, a flash of hair, or the pale curve of a shoulder. Always far enough away that I could convince myself it was nothing, but close enough that my chest tightened all the same. One night, I brought myself to sit at the end of the dock. The wood was damp beneath me. the smell of lake water sharp in the air. I waited in the quiet, listening to the insects hum, the faint slap of waves against the posts. Hours passed and nothing happened. I almost laughed at myself for coming, ready to stand and go, when I heard it. Water shifting, not splashing, shifting, like someone wading slowly in the shallows. I leaned forward, squinting into the dark, and there she was. A woman, waist deep in the water, her dress plastered against her, her hair trailing like weeds. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. She stood still, her face tilted down, her arms at her sides. Then she raised her head just enough for me to see her eyes, empty, washed out, fixed on me with a weight that made my whole body lock up. I should have run, I should have screamed. Instead, I just sat there while she began to walk closer. The water barely rippled around her, each step deliberate, silent. And then she stopped, right where the shallows dropped off into deep water. She lifted her hand, slow and deliberate, and pointed straight at me. That was when I finally broke. I stumbled back off the dock, scraping my palms raw, half running, half crawling to my truck. By the time I looked back, the water was flat again. Nothing there, no woman, no sign of her at all. But when I opened the truck door, I saw the wet prints on the dock. Bare feet, small, leading from the water to where I had been sitting. I don't talk about it much anymore. People either don't believe you or they believe too much. What I know is this: my friend didn't drown by mistake. And when he said she's right there, he wasn't talking nonsense. He saw her before I ever did. And now I can't stop wondering when I'll see her again. Story 5. I didn't grow up around the lake, so when I first moved to the area, I didn't understand why people talked about it the way they did. Everyone had a story. Some swore it was haunted, others said it was cursed, but plenty of folks just called it dangerous. I figured most of it was exaggeration, until I saw what was under there for myself. I worked part-time with a diving crew. Nothing official, just helping out when people lost equipment overboard or when debris needed clearing near docks. Most of the time, it was simple work. Drop down, find what you can, come back up. But the first time I went under that lake, I realized how different it felt from anywhere else I'd been. The water wasn't just murky, it was heavy. Like the deeper you went, the more it pressed down on you. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me, even with a flashlight. And then there were the shapes. At first, they looked like shadows, but as I got closer, I realized they were structures, roofs, chimneys, old fence posts, all half buried in silt, whole pieces of the town that used to stand there before the water covered it. It was unsettling, drifting over rooftops like you were flying over a drowned neighborhood. Some of the windows were still intact. My light would catch them, and I'd get this awful feeling like someone was staring back from inside. One afternoon, I was asked to help recover an anchor that had dropped near a deeper section of the lake. The visibility was terrible, but I followed the rope down, pulling hand over hand until I hit bottom. The anchor had snagged on something solid. I thought it was just rock, until I brushed away the silt with my glove and saw the outline of a wooden beam. Not rock at all. I followed it with my light and realized it was a roofline. A whole building sitting in the dark, its walls still standing, its doorway half open like it was waiting. The anchor chain had wrapped around one of the posts and cut deep into the wood. I should have freed it and gone back up. That's what I told myself, but curiosity got the better of me. I floated closer to the doorway, shining my light inside. It hit a staircase going down into blackness. Something about that staircase made my chest seize up. It didn't make sense. Why would there still be stairs going deeper when the whole thing was underwater? Yet there it was, steps vanishing into the dark. I hovered there longer than I should have, trying to see if anything moved inside. The water shifted slightly, pulling my light beam just enough to make it look like something was swaying at the bottom of those stairs. I blinked, shook my head, but the feeling didn't pass. I reached down to untangle the chain, trying to work fast, but the more I pulled, the tighter it seemed wound. That's when I felt it, a sudden tug against my fin, sharp and deliberate. I froze. My first thought was that I'd caught on some rebar, or maybe a branch sticking out from the roof, but when I pointed the light down, there was nothing there. I kicked hard, trying to shake it, and the chain finally loosened in my hands. I was ready to go up, but I made the mistake of glancing back at that doorway one last time. The staircase wasn't empty anymore. Something pale was floating halfway down it. Not rising, not sinking, just waiting. I didn't stay to see what it was. I shot for the surface so fast, I nearly blacked out from the pressure. But ever since that dive, I've had dreams about that staircase. Always the same. Always drifting just above it, light trembling in my hand, before something starts moving toward me from below. I didn't sleep the night after that dive. My body was exhausted, but every time I shut my eyes, the dream came back. I was back at the edge of those stairs, drifting weightless, my light flickering on that pale figure waiting in the dark. I'd jolt awake, gasping, sweat sticking to my neck. But within minutes, I'd be dozing again, sliding right back into the same scene. Over and over. The next day, I swore I wasn't going back in. But work doesn't care about what you dream. 2 days later, they needed me on another job, same general area, though a little shallower. I didn't say a word about what I'd seen. I told myself it was fatigue, my eyes playing tricks in the dark. Nobody else had reported anything unusual down there. And I didn't feel like being the guy who brought up ghost stories when there was real work to do. The second I hit the water, though, the same pressure clamped down on my chest. It wasn't panic. It wasn't the gear. It was the lake itself. Every stroke felt slower than it should have. Every sound muted. The others worked above me, voices muffled through their masks, but I drifted down again, following the line to the bottom. It wasn't long before I recognized the roofline I'd seen before. My stomach dropped. We hadn't meant to return to the exact same place, but there it was, waiting. The silt clouded up around the building like it had been disturbed recently, though no one I knew had been down there since me. The anchor we were after had caught again, wedged this time near a broken window. I gritted my teeth, got closer, told myself to just free it and leave. But when I pulled at the chain, my flashlight beam swung across the glass. The inside wasn't empty anymore. Something floated there, motionless, but it wasn't the pale figure from before. This looked more like a shape draped in fabric, as if curtains had come loose and were suspended in the water. I squinted, leaned closer. That was when the fabric turned, slow, as if it had been listening the whole time. I didn't wait. I yanked at the chain with everything I had until it came free and shot back upward, bubbles roaring in my ears. The others said I came up too fast, reckless, but I couldn't explain. Not properly. Just shook my head and said I'd gotten caught in brush. That night, the dreams came back, but they changed. No more floating above the stairs. Now I was inside. The building was whole again, dry and silent. The staircase stretched down, but I couldn't see the bottom. My feet moved anyway, dragging me step by step, and somewhere below I could hear water dripping. I woke with my hands clenched so tight I'd left marks in my palms. For weeks, I avoided jobs near that part of the lake. If I even spotted the outline of the building from a distance, I'd steer away. But the lake has a way of drawing you back whether you like it or not. Months later, a call came in about a missing fisherman. His boat had been found drifting, no sign of him. The coordinates they gave us landed right near that same area. My gut twisted, but I didn't argue. We dropped in, scanning the bottom with our lights, checking for any sign of him. One of the other divers motioned toward the building. I already knew. My chest went hollow as I followed him to the same broken window, the same yawning doorway. He went in first. I hesitated, hovering outside, the light trembling in my hand. Then I heard it through the regulator. Not a voice exactly, but the suggestion of one. Like a word almost formed in the crackle of my own breathing. It said, "Down." I froze. The other diver disappeared inside. My pulse hammered so loud I could feel it in my teeth. I stayed outside for as long as I could bear, kicking gently to keep my balance, staring into that doorway. And then, in the corner of my light, I saw him, the missing fisherman, pressed against the glass of the lower window, eyes wide, mouth open like he'd been screaming the whole time. By the time we got him out, it was too late. They said he'd drowned. Simple as that. But I know what I saw. His hands were bloodied, the glass scratched raw from the inside. I haven't gone back down since, and the dreams haven't stopped. In them, I'm always at the bottom of those stairs now. And each time, there's one more person standing in the dark beside me. Story 6. I used to work nights at a small marina, one of those out-of-the-way places where you pump gas for boats, check slips, make sure nobody is sneaking in to fish without paying. It was easy money, and most nights were so quiet, I'd sit in the little office and half-watch TV until morning. But there was this one stretch, late summer, when I started noticing things I couldn't laugh off. The first time, I thought it was a prank. Around 2 in the morning, I was walking the dock with a flashlight when I saw someone sitting at the very end, feet dangling over the water. The light hit them only for a second, but I caught the outline of long hair, white shirt, completely still. I called out, asked if they were supposed to be there. No answer. When I lifted the beam again, the dock was empty. I told myself they'd just slipped into the water. People did that sometimes, thinking they could swim across after a night of drinking. But the surface was flat, not a ripple, no wet footprints, nothing. I stood there a lot longer than I should have, listening to the lapping against the wood, waiting for some sign of movement. Eventually, I walked back, heart racing the whole way. It didn't stop there. A week later, I was in the office when the radio crackled. Not the walkie we used between staff. The Marine band set to emergency channel. A woman's voice came through, low, muffled, like she was underwater. I leaned in close, thinking maybe it was a boater in trouble, but the words didn't make sense. They weren't even full sentences, just a string of half-formed phrases that slipped away before I could hold on to them. I answered, asked for her location. Nothing, just static. Then, faintly, one word, here. The radio went dead. That night, I left the lights on in the office, every single one of them. it didn't matter. When I looked out the window toward the water, I swore I saw someone moving along the dock again, same shape as before. The worst part wasn't seeing it though. The worst part was hearing the splash afterward, as if someone had stepped off the edge and gone straight down. I grabbed the big handheld spotlight we kept by the door and ran out. The beam cut across the water, bright as day, but the surface was empty. No head bobbing, no arms thrashing. The lake just swallowed the light and gave nothing back. By the third week, I wasn't telling anyone about it anymore. My boss didn't like excuses, and I didn't feel like getting laughed at, but it was eating at me. The calls on the radio kept coming, always late, always garbled, always ending in that single word, here. One night, I made the mistake of answering differently. Instead of asking location, I just said, "Where are you?" There was a pause, then what sounded like a laugh, wet and broken. And then she said, "Behind you." I spun so fast, the chair tipped over. The window behind me looked out on the lake. Nothing there but black water and faint dock lights swaying. But I swear, in the reflection on the glass, I caught a second shape standing just over my shoulder. After that, I stopped sitting in the office. I spent my nights walking the docks, anything to avoid being boxed in by walls and windows. I thought maybe if I stayed out in the open, I'd see her coming instead of waiting for her to sneak up. It didn't help. The radio followed me no matter where I went, and one night she did too. That was the night I heard the splashing again, closer than ever, like someone swimming under the dock where I stood. I crouched, light aimed at the water, and caught sight of hair fanning out just below the surface. My throat locked up. She wasn't swimming. She was staring up at me, eyes open, mouth moving, bubbles slipping between her teeth. And then her hand shot out, breaking the water, reaching for the edge where I knelt. I dropped the light. The beam spun wild across the water, then vanished into the dark. The flashlight clattered against the dock and rolled into the gap, hitting the water with a dull splash. I froze, staring at the spot where her hand had broken the surface. It was gone now, but the wood beneath my knees was wet, as though something had brushed against it. I leaned back, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out, and all I could hear was the water lapping quietly against the pilings. I didn't know whether to run or scream. I just sat there for a long time, gripping the dock with both hands, afraid to look down again. When I finally stood, I forced myself to walk, not sprint, back toward the office. My legs were trembling, but I kept a steady pace, like moving too fast would give her permission to follow. Inside, every light was still on, humming with that faint electric buzz. The overturned chair was lying where I had left it, but the radio was no longer static. It was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy. I reached for it, hand shaking, and the second I touched the receiver, it hissed back to life. Her voice was clear this time, too clear. "Why did you leave?" I dropped it like it burned me. The radio clattered on the desk, and the transmission cut out again. I didn't work the rest of my shift. I left the lights on, locked the door, and sat in my car until morning. Every time I glanced at the rearview mirror, I half expected to see her, sitting in the back seat, dripping, waiting. The next day, I told myself it was done. I wasn't going back out on the dock at night. I'd sit in the office, let the hours pass, keep the TV running just loud enough to drown out the hum of the radio. But fear doesn't work like that. It waits, and it found me again a week later. It started with the smell. Lake water has a certain odor, muddy and stale, especially in summer. But this was different, stronger, rotting, like something had been left to soak in the sun. I thought maybe a fish had died near the dock and drifted close, but the smell was coming from the office itself. Story 7. The water was black that night, flat and calm, the kind of stillness that made me uneasy. I had agreed to meet a couple of coworkers for some night fishing. Nothing serious, just lines off the pier and a cooler of beer. They bailed at the last second, and I should have gone home too. But I was stubborn. I had all my gear, the air was warm, and I thought maybe I'd enjoy the quiet. It didn't take long for me to notice I wasn't alone. At first, it was just the sound of an oar dipping somewhere out past the reach of the floodlight. One slow pull, then nothing. A pause long enough to make me lean forward, squinting at the lake. Then another pull. I thought maybe it was just someone drifting, but it felt deliberate, like whoever it was wanted me to hear them. "Anybody out there?" I called. My voice came back in pieces, bouncing off the water. No answer, just another stroke of the oar, closer this time. The floodlight on the pier flickered once, then steadied. I reeled in my line, telling myself I'd pack it up. That was when I saw the boat. It slid out of the darkness, with no sound, no motor, just a pale wooden skiff gliding toward the dock. There was someone inside, sitting low, back bent. I couldn't make out a face, not even an outline, just the silhouette of a body hunched forward, arms resting on their knees. "Need some help?" I tried again, but my voice cracked. No movement. The boat bumped softly against the piling. The person never raised their head. They just sat there, and the oar slipped from their fingers into the water, floating away. I waited for them to reach for it, but they didn't. The silence pressed in, and I felt something twist in my gut, a kind of warning I couldn't explain. I backed up, keeping my eyes on the boat. That was when I noticed the water around it wasn't still anymore. It was rippling outward, faint but steady, like something was circling below. I took another step back, and the floodlight cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. When the light went out, the first thing I noticed was how loud the night suddenly became. The insects, the creak of the dock, the water lapping at the pilings, all of it roared in my ears. I froze, not sure if my eyes were playing tricks on me, because the boat was still there, but now it seemed closer, like it had drifted forward in the dark. "Hey," I said, my voice shaking. "You okay?" Still no movement, no answer. I fumbled for my phone to use the flashlight, but my hands were slick with sweat. When I finally got it to light up, the beam cut across the boat. My stomach dropped. The seat was empty. I swung the light back and forth over the water, over the dock, expecting to see someone climbing out. But there was nothing, just the boat rocking gently, water licking at the sides. Then came the splash. It wasn't the sharp crack of a fish jumping. It was heavier, fuller, like something big had surfaced right beneath the dock. The boards shuddered under my feet, and I stumbled backward, my phone nearly slipping into the water. "Who's out there?" I yelled, but the sound came out strangled. That was when I saw it, the hand, pale, slick, gripping the edge of the dock just a few feet from me. Not a swimmer's hand, not steady. It clawed upward, like it was trying to drag something out, the fingers flexing with effort. I bolted. My tackle box clattered to the wood behind me, but I didn't care. I ran all the way down the pier, my boots thudding, every instinct screaming at me not to look back. When I reached the gravel lot, I finally turned around. The floodlight flickered back on, buzzing like it had just woken from a bad dream. The pier was empty. The boat was gone. No hand on the dock. I stood there, gasping, convinced I had lost my mind. The next morning, I came back in daylight. I told myself I'd prove it was nothing, just a trick of shadows. The boat would still be tied up, or maybe it had drifted back to shore. But when I walked the length of the pier, there was nothing but clear water stretching out. No boat, no oar. Then I noticed the wet prints. They started at the edge of the dock, faint outlines of bare feet pressed into the wood. They trailed all the way down the pier, stopping right where I had dropped my tackle box. That was enough for me. I left my gear there and never came back for it. A few weeks later, one of the guys I was supposed to fish with that night asked why I hadn't been showing up lately. I told him I was done with night fishing. He smirked and said, "Smart. You don't want to run into her." I asked what he meant. He shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. The one people see out there. Some lady drowned years back. Folks say she rows around in an old skiff looking for a way back. My uncle swore he saw her sitting in his boat once, middle of the night. Thought she was asleep until he realized she wasn't breathing. He laughed like it was just another story. But I could feel my throat tightening as he talked. I never told him about the prints, and I never told him I still dream about that hand scraping at the wood, trying to pull itself into the light.